Thank you very much for inviting me to give this keynote here at the National Institute of Informatics. My name is Klaus Tochtermann. I'm a computer scientist from Germany, and I will be talking about the EOSC, the European Open Science Cloud. Before I go into the details of the EOSC, please allow me to briefly talk about where I do come from. I am the director of the Leibniz Information Center for Economics, ZBW. ZBW is the world's largest information infrastructure for economics. And we are responsible for the provision of economic literature, of economic research data to the economic research community in Germany, but also beyond. In our institute, we also have a research group, and the focus there is on open science, and this is the connection to the European Open Science Cloud. We operate with a budget of around about 25 million euros per year, and we have 220 full-time equivalents distributed among two locations. One is based in Hamburg, the other one in Kiel. Both cities are in the north of Germany. My talk will start with an introduction to the European Open Science Cloud, followed by a brief outline of the strategic approach and an insight of where do we stand, what is the status quo of EOSC. I cannot go into all the details of the technical aspects, but I will highlight the most advanced technical aspects which we are currently discussing within the context of the EOSC. Before I talk about the latest developments on the cross-platform collaboration. My talk will end with avenues for cooperation with Japan. Now let's start with the introduction to the EOSC. What is the EOSC all about? In Europe, we have, I don't know how many, but certainly hundreds of data repositories. They are all disconnected from one another. They are all, in some cases, data silos. That is, you only have access to the data if you visit these data repositories. And the objective of the EOSC is to connect all these data repositories with one another, as you can see here on the left-hand side. And why is that important? It's important because science is getting more and more cross-disciplinary. For example, look at this research question, fishing for proteins. How does marine fisheries impact on global food security up to 2025? In order to answer this research question, you would need research data about marine fisheries, you would need data about the global food situation, and you would maybe need surveys and studies on how the global food development will be in the next 10 to 20 years. And therefore, at this point in time, you would need to consult different data repositories to access the data for each of the different research parts. EOSC aims to provide a single point of access, which allows you to enter your search query, and then EOSC delivers all the research data which is related to your research questions, regardless of the repository it is stored in. The users are even not required to be aware about the connected research repositories. They just get the data from the EOSC. This is the basic idea. And what is our vision? Our vision is to establish a European web of fair data and related services for research. And why is that? Because we want to unlock the full potential of research data. We want to connect the data silos with one another to accelerate discovery and innovation in Europe. Now, that is the idea. How do we think we will implement this idea? We have started with a concept of a minimal viable environment of the EOSC, which is a cascaded model. At the center of this cascade, you see the EOSC core. And the EOSC core provides basic services, for example, an AAI or a login feature, a upload feature, a search component, and things like that. At the next level, we have the data federation. That is the component where all the data from the connected repositories will be federated. That means we will kind of harvest the metadata from the repositories, will map them on a common metadata schema of the EOSC, which is then used for the search feature of the European Open Science Cloud. At level 3, we have the interoperability framework. This relates to the standards for protocols, for example, how to access the repositories. It relates to guidelines, how would we, for example, allow cross-border collaboration in the context of GDPR, that is the European privacy regulation. And finally, we have the EOSC Exchange. EOSC Exchange is kind of a digital marketplace where different resource providers, and resource could be a service or it could be data, make their offers, and then the community decides which offer they want to take to for their research questions for the purposes they have. The governance structure to develop this really complex federation of existing repositories is the following. On the right-hand side, you see the EOSC Association. The EOSC Association represents the European scientific community. We have round about 250 members from research performing organizations. We have funders, we have service providers, and organizations like that from the science system. We have a board of directors. I am a member of the 8 directors of the board and a president and a secretary general. We are the voice of the community. And this voice speaks to the European Commission on the left-hand side, plus the member states. And these three stakeholders are also referred to as the tripartite collaboration. The member states and the Commission accepted to provide 500 million euros to the development of the EOSC, and the members, represented by the EOSC Association, committed themselves to provide another 500 million euros as in-kind contribution to the development of EOSC, which in the end sums up to 1 billion euro to develop the European Open Science Cloud. Well, what is our strategy to, in a stepwise fashion, progress towards the EOSC, and where do we stand at this point in time? The strategy is written down in the so-called SRIA, that is the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda. That is a document which is updated regularly. Currently, we have the version 1.2. It's a document which is commonly agreed by the tripartite collaboration. And I have highlighted here, for example, the chapter on implementation challenges. So you get an idea of what we discuss, and continuous discussion is PIDs, persistent identifiers, because we have different implementations in place, like DOIs or handles. Metadata and ontology is certainly another important topic, fair metrics, AAI, resource provider environments, and things like that. This is all written down in the SRIA, and the SRIA has a long-term perspective on the strategy for the EOSC. One chapter of the SRIA is the multi-annual roadmap. This breaks down the strategy for the next years into a strategy for the next 2 years. And you see here there's 3 stages, stage 1, 2, 3, which have all different foci on what should be addressed within the respective 2 years. The SRIA and the multi-annual roadmap are very important documents because they feed into the Infra-EOSC program of the European Commission. The Infra-EOSC program is the funding program of the European Commissions to which consortia can apply to receive funding. That is, here we define the big important topics to be addressed, and these topics are then covered by the call for proposals from the European Commission. And how do we create the 3R and the annual roadmap? We do that in the form of so-called task forces. Currently, we have 4 task forces. I have highlighted here fair metrics and digital objects because I am the link between the board of the EOSC Association and the scientific community on this matter. And we have 55 researchers, experts from our member organizations, and they develop within the next 18 months a clear agenda for what needs to be done in order to improve fair metrics, fair metric assessment, and things like that. And the outcome, the recommendations of the task forces, they feed into the multi-annual roadmap, and the multi-annual roadmap again feeds into the call for proposals of the European Commission. We did it since our inception in 2021, and here is a summary of what we achieved with the task forces between 2021 and 2023. We had 13 task forces in the first period. 400 experts have been involved, contributed with their expertise to round about 24 deliverables, which are all available on the web. So this is how our members can get engaged in the development of the European Open Science Cloud. And you see we have a quite lively and active community. Where do we stand? Under this web address, opensciencecloud.ec.europe.eu, you can look at what is referred to as the EOSC EU node. The EOSC EU node is, so to say, the core of the EOSC, if you remember the cascaded model, which I showed earlier. And in that EOSC EU node, we will provide the following services: a sync and share service, virtual machines, bulk transfer, large file transfer, interactive notebooks for real-time code executions, such generic services. These services will be launched officially in October this year. We will run a huge event in Germany, by the way, the European Open Science Cloud Symposium, with round about 500 participants in person, plus another 500 participants online. These are the services. There's also a resource hub, which collects resources from connected repositories. And currently we have more than 5 million resources, which are accessible through the EOSC EU node. And the resources are around about 2 million publications, 2 million research data sets, I think 150,000 software codes, and other products and services. So this is where we stand at this point in time. Advanced technical aspects. Here I cannot go into the detail of all the technical aspects because that would be too much for the time frame of this keynote. I just want to highlight those topics which are currently very much on vogue in Europe. It's number one, a generic fair assessment tool. You might know that we have several tools for assessing the level of fair maturity. For example, RDA produced one, but there are also others around. And we want one generic fair assessment tool, which can then be applied regardless of the discipline. Related to that, a big discussion currently takes place on FAIR for AI and AI for fair artificial intelligence. FAIR for AI relates to the large language models because, as you know, in artificial intelligence, generative AI relies on large language models, but often we don't know what content is in this large language model. Where does it come from? And FAIR might help to provide more transparency on the data which is used in an LLM. AI for fair, the other way around, here we have hope that AI can help us to produce fair metadata, because as you know, providing a fair metadata is quite time-consuming. And we are investigating to what extent can artificial intelligence help the researchers to make their data and metadata fair. Another topic which has been on vogue for many, many years in Europe are the standards for metadata. Currently, we have the community-specific standards. We have generic standards. For example, a generic standard is DataCite. A community-specific standard in my field, economics and social sciences, is DDI. And how can we combine the two? How can we, for example, extend a generic metadata standard with a community-specific standard? These are the questions which are currently addressed in Europe. Related to that, semantic interoperability is a huge topic if we talk about federation of repositories, because in each repository, we have a metadata schema. And these metadata schemas needs to be mapped on one another. So you have a metadata schema A, a metadata schema B, and semantic interoperability means that those metadata fields from schema A are mapped on the semantically correct fields of schema B, and this by machines and not by humans. And finally, knowledge graphs. Knowledge graphs is also such a hype in Europe at this point in time for storage management, but mainly for the provision of information, of connected and interconnected information. All the project results we have produced in the past 6 years are available on the homepage of the EOSC Association. Here is the link. And if you look down, there are categorized the outcomes according to the 4 categories: implementation, landscape, and so on. And if you click on the implementation challenges, you get all the deliverables which have been produced by the projects which have been funded from the European Commission to develop the European Open Science Cloud. So that's a very nice tool to access what is already there. What are the developments in cross-platform collaboration? Well, the European Commission came up with the concept of so-called nodes. And in the center of this node concept, we have the EOSC EU node. The EOSC EU node refers to the EOSC core, which I presented earlier in my cascaded model. So the EOSC EU node provides basic services like uploading, downloading, searching, login, AAI infrastructure, and things like that. That's the core. And the Commission has procured a consortium with 30 million euros to develop the EOSC EU node, the core. And that core, the EOSC EU node, will be officially launched in version 1.0 October this year. But this is just basic services. And therefore, we need further nodes. We need further infrastructures. And here we differentiate between thematic infrastructures, thematic community nodes. For example, the community in economics and social sciences can form a node, can bring together the infrastructures they have and offer that as a contribution to the EOSC. The same applies to nations who can form a coalition and apply as a national node. For example, in Germany, we did that with our National Research Data Initiative. We applied as a whole, as a national initiative, to become a node, to become an infrastructure connected to the EOSC. We might have also other types of nodes, for example, regional nodes, the Nordic countries in Europe, that is Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Norway. They could form a node and say, okay, we bring in all our infrastructures, all our services and data we have into the EOSC EU node. And from the EOSC EU node perspective, they would have one reference point to speak to all the Nordic countries, to speak to Germany, or to speak to a thematic community. The idea is then, if we look as the EOSC as a federated system of systems, that from a user's perspective, they just enter the EOSC node provided by the European Commission, the EOSC EU node. And this node is connected to the national, to the regional nodes. It's connected to institutional nodes or to thematic clusters. And the users don't have to be aware what is all connected in the background. They just access the EOSC EU node. They get the information, the data they need, regardless of where it is hosted. That is the idea of the EOSC EU node. Now the question is, what actually is a node? What qualifies an infrastructure to be connected to the EOSC EU node? And here we define some requirements, some criteria. For example, a node should contain resources which add value to the EOSC. A resource could either be data, it could also be services. What's important is an EOSC node and such an infrastructure must act as a legal entity that can interact with the EOSC governance structure. And that's an issue that is heavily debated in Europe because we have infrastructures, big projects, which do not act as a legal representative. They are not a legal entity. They are just, a big project. But the project itself is not a legal representative, and we are currently working on a solution to this debate. Of course, the nodes, they can control their own operations and resources. We, from the EOSC EU node, will not interfere into their policies, into their operations and resources. We just want to connect to their resources and may use the services they have and which might be of value to the EOSC. Of course, an EOSC must comply with the EOSC interoperability framework. I mentioned on level 3 of the cascaded model, interoperability is a huge issue. And the EOSC EU node must comply with these framework, with these standards, because otherwise, from EOSC EU node perspective, we cannot access the data they have, we cannot access the metadata they have, we cannot use the services they offer. And these federation requirements are currently being written down in an EOSC Federation Handbook. That is work in progress. We have currently finalized the first 3 chapters and are working on chapter 4 and 5 at the moment. And chapter 4 is an important chapter because that relates to the fair data and services. It relates to the interoperability framework, which I was just mentioned. Links to external entities, for example, high-performance computing in Europe is very well organized. What is the relation between EOSC and Euro HPC, the high-performance computing in Europe, and other topics? So this is then the Federation Handbook, which will be a joint publication of the tripartite collaboration that is the scientific community, the European Commission, and the member states. And there we define all the requirements under which national thematic nodes can become a node within the European Open Science Cloud. I come to the end and will just highlight a few avenues for cooperation with your country, with Japan. Number 1, and you all can join the EOSC Technology Forum. You can go to the Open Science Cloud webpage, and there they differentiate between a user forum and a technology forum, and you can just sign up and join that forum and contribute to the technology development and get insights in what technologies are being used there. At a higher level, there is the Global Open Science Cloud initiative, which is hosted with the CoData. This initiative was initiated by CoData because there they realized that we have different activities related to the EOSC in the world regions. For example, we have a cloud initiative in Australia. We have an initiative like in Japan. We have an initiative in Africa. We have an initiative in the US. And the Global Open Science Cloud brings together these initiatives to discuss standards for connecting the different regional open science clouds with one another. Frankly, I'm not involved in that in one of the working groups, so I don't know how active they are, but it's certainly a activity to have a closer look at. And finally, we have in Germany the National Research Data Infrastructure, in which I'm involved with several projects. I'm also a member of the Scientific Senate of the NFDI. And you can network with institutions involved in the NFDI so that we link up our repositories with new repositories and make our data accessible to one another. And here I would like to point to my planned visit in Q1 next year, which I'm currently planning because I couldn't come this time, but I was so impressed from what I've seen on open research data activities in Japan that I want to learn more about it. And currently we are planning that visit, and sometime early next year I will be there, and then we can further explore how we can collaborate with our countries, with our regions. Here I'm coming to the end. Vielen Dank means thank you very much. What you see here are our building in Kiel on the left-hand side and our building in Hamburg on the right side. Thank you very much for your attention. And I wish you a constructive, inspiring conference during the next days. Thank you very much.